I used to think failure was my greatest enemy. Now I know. It's silence. The kind that wears the face of sweet smiles, warm hugs laced with poison, and a wedding cake engraved with the wrong name. 3 years ago, I left town without looking back. No heavy luggage, no tears. Just one rolling suitcase and a goodbye no one heard. Farewell to those who didn't choose me. Now, I'm sitting in the tiny kitchen of a seaside cafe where I work, holding an ivory envelope embossed with the name I thought I had buried. Dune, curling across the surface like ivy clinging to an old church wall. The mailman didn't know what he was handing me, but inside that envelope wasn't just an invitation. It was a storm, a reckoning that threatened to swallow the quiet I had bought with every piece of my soul. I opened it slowly. The paper was thick, the ink still fresh. Dune and Company, 50th Anniversary Gala, Family, Honor, Legacy. Family, Honor, Legacy. I laughed, a dry sound that startled the cafe's black cat off its chair. Outside the window, Charleston was slipping into sunset. Amber streaks stretched over the shoulders of passing cyclists, while I sat there like a ghost watching a play I used to write but was no longer cast in. I poured more coffee, thought of Aria's golden curls and my mother Celeste's eyes whenever she reminded me to know my place. And Benji, who once slipped a ring onto my finger only to later place it on hers, like I had just been a fitting session for someone else's forever. I should have cried, but I didn't. I'd cried enough, on that night, in that year, in the version of me that no longer exists. I folded the invitation, slid it carefully into my bag like a piece of evidence. Inside it, a past I no longer needed. Outside, me, Elara Dune, the girl who once disappeared. And now, she's on her way back. 3 years ago, engagement party at the Dune Estate, Port Haven. The ivory dress I wore that day was one I chose myself. Not because it was extravagant, but because it fit. Like Benji once told me, you don't need anything else to stand out, just be yourself. And I believed him. I remember waiting behind the white wooden doors, fingers entwined to still the tremble. The engagement was supposed to be simple, a small ceremony in our garden, with fairy lights strung between trees and a violin quartet playing softly under the magnolia branches. To me, it was the beginning of a family, a future, a love I thought we had built together. Until they said the wrong name. Not Benji and Elara, but Benji and Aria. The applause that followed sounded like slaps echoing inside my skull. I stood frozen behind the white curtain, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Someone brushed past, whispering, "Move aside." I turned and met my mother's eyes. No shock, no panic, not even a flicker of guilt, only a calm, unnervingly composed look. The look of someone who had known all along. And then Aria stepped out, wearing the dress I had once tried on, her hair styled just like I'd suggested. And Benji, the man I had loved, held her hand as if it had always been meant to be. I don't remember how I left the garden, only that my palms bled from how tightly I had clenched my fists, and that my white shoes turned brown from mud and tears. I ran like a stranger crashing someone else's happiness, like I was the intruder, the mistake, the other woman. Later, in the kitchen, my mother told me, "You've always been the gentle one, Aria." She needed this win to get her life back on track. And you're introspective, thoughtful. You'll understand. I let out a hollow laugh. It didn't come from my throat. It came from that gaping space inside me where trust had been carved out. "And what about my love?" I asked. She shrugged. "Love can be replaced. Reputation can't." That answer, and the way Arya held Benji's hand at dinner as if nothing had happened, was the moment I knew. This family never needed me, and I didn't need them to become who I was meant to be. Port Haven. 2 days after the engagement party, the town hadn't changed. Slow, soft, and indifferent to any pain that wasn't loud enough to be noticed. This morning, the sky was the color of ash. No rain, but damp enough to make you feel suspended, somewhere between ending and not quite beginning. I slammed the trunk shut behind me, stuffing the last suitcase into the gap between my paint box, empty frames, and a few sets of clothes from past seasons. A canvas tote embroidered with my name, Elara, was the only thing left from the days I believed this place was home. The old car groaned to life, coughing like an aging man waking from a fevered sleep. I clicked the seatbelt into place. My hands trembled, not from fear, but because, for the first time in my life, I was leaving without a destination. All I knew was this: there was nothing behind me worth turning back for. Before I passed through the iron gates of the Dune estate, I left an envelope on the kitchen table. No name, no note. Inside it was a half-finished drawing I had planned to give Benji, of the two of us reading beneath the willow tree in the backyard. His so-called little heaven. The tires rolled slowly past streets I once walked to school, delivered letters on, painted murals at bus stops because I thought this town needed more color. Now I know. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it was already perfect, for those who knew how to stay inside the lines. But me? I was ink that bled outside the margin, and I had stopped apologizing for it. I drove south, no music, just the hum of the engine and the tap of wind against glass. Each mile away from Port Haven peeled off another layer of old skin. Not to become someone new, but to return to someone they never truly saw. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew this. This time, no one else gets to choose my direction. On my first day in Charleston, it rained all afternoon. Not the thunderstorm kind. No flashes, no drama. Just a soft, persistent rain, like a quiet reminder. Don't expect a welcome. Just find a place to stand. I rented a small room above an old bookstore at the far end of Spring Street, where the sound of streetcars echoed like memories from another century. The landlady, Maeve, a widowed Irishwoman, handed me the key with a look that asked no questions. She'd probably seen plenty like me. Faces calm on the outside, but eyes not yet grounded. Too much taken too fast without time to take it back. The room was small, with a low ceiling and creaky wooden floors. A single window opened to an alley, where I could hear radio static drifting up from the shoe repair shop below, and the sharp cry of cats banished by the rain. I placed my one box of paintbrushes on a wooden desk near the window. On the first sheet of paper in this new place, I didn't know what to draw. So I wrote, "My name is Elara Dune. I don't need anyone to know who I am. I just need to remember how deeply I once forgot myself." I found a part-time job at the Wayfarer Cafe, a small riverside spot known for its caramel waffles and Friday night jazz. I brewed coffee, wiped tables, learned how to smile just enough, how to listen without offering anything back. The owner, Lisette, was a petite Haitian woman with eyes sharp enough to spot typos in things left unsaid. After a week, she handed me a small envelope with my pay and said, "You don't look like someone ready to give up, no matter how sad your eyes are." I thanked her. Didn't ask why. A part of me was still relearning trust, or at least how to accept kindness without fearing the hook hidden beneath it. On slow evenings, I stayed after hours and painted on leftover scraps of wood Lisette collected from the kitchen. Not full paintings, just messy lines, half-formed thoughts. But slowly, the back wall behind the counter began to bloom with color. Lisette called it Elle's Corner. 3 months in, a regular, brown hair, quiet, always ordered espresso with no sugar, stared at one of the wood panels for a long time before finally speaking. "I'm opening a small restaurant," he said. "I want to hang some of these." I looked up, startled. He studied me like someone seeing something old turn new again. "What you paint? It's not perfect, but it's alive." I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I wasn't ready to say thank you. And that's how I began again. Charleston. One April afternoon, then one day, the regular with the brown hair, Rowan, walked up to the bar, set his cup down, and said in a low voice, "I took one of your pieces home, the wood panel behind the counter. It kept me up all night." I looked up, surprised. It was the first time I'd heard him speak more than 3 words. "Oh, I hope not because it was terrible." "No," he said. "It was honest, uncomfortably honest." I didn't know how to respond, but I smiled. A small, real smile. The first in months. The next day, he came back, carrying a paper bag. "I've got something for you," he said, setting it down while I was wiping the counter. "Been testing a new dish. Wanted your opinion." I glanced inside. A wooden lunchbox, neatly packed with turmeric rice and salmon in lemon sauce. The aroma was soft, warm, strangely comforting. "Are you a chef?" I asked. "Trying to be," he replied. "Just leased a space near the riverfront. Still empty, like the inside of someone who just left something behind." I nodded. Didn't ask more. He didn't push. I didn't need to look hard to know the kind of person he was. Someone who didn't care much for doing things the right way. But the real way. Rowan started coming in almost every afternoon after that. Not for the coffee. He said my espresso tasted like youth, bold and slightly bitter. But because, in his words, it's easier to breathe here. Charleston, a Saturday evening, early May. I stood before a dark wooden door with a small inscription carved in simple letters. The Birch Table. No neon signs, no music thumping through the walls. Just the soft chime of wind bells as I pushed open the door, and the scent, cedarwood mixed with toasted buttered bread, greeted me like a quiet embrace. Inside felt like a giant open kitchen shaped like a heart. Bare brick walls, long communal tables, a few mismatched leather chairs. The bookshelf held a strange mix of cookbooks and romance novels. The lights hung under crooked fabric lampshades, off-center, but somehow just right. I stood still, letting the fragrance of lemongrass, cinnamon, and something faintly smoky weave itself into my hair. "You came," Rowan said, stepping out from the open kitchen, still holding a wooden spoon, apron stained faintly with oil. He smiled, that lazy smile I'd come to recognize. Except tonight, it held something else. Nervousness, maybe. I nodded, pulling my hands from my coat pockets. "Didn't you say the grand opening is next week?" "That's the official one." He motioned for me to follow. "Tonight is to see if this place can hold the attention of one very particular guest." I raised an eyebrow. "Who's that?" Rowan smiled, but didn't answer, gesturing to a lone chair near the window that looked out onto a narrow alley. "Best seat in the house," he'd once said, "because it doesn't try to be." Dinner was 3 courses. The starter, roasted potato soup with thyme cream, warm, soft, like a greeting whispered, not spoken. The main, pan-seared flounder with fresh turmeric sauce and herbed rice. Rich, but light. It ended on a lemon note so gentle it felt like someone reminding you, don't forget to breathe. The dessert was what made me pause. Vanilla bean ice cream topped with bruleed honey and crushed salted walnuts. "This one's meant to ask a question," Rowan said, leaning his elbow on the table, tilting his head slightly. "What's something you've always wanted, but never dared to try? I replied, I used to think I wanted to love someone forever. But now, I just want to eat a good dessert without being afraid that tomorrow I'll be left alone at an empty table. Rowan nodded. He didn't smile this time. Then here's a promise. Whatever happens tomorrow, I won't leave you sitting alone. And I believed him. Not because I was naive, but because, for the first time, trust didn't come from a vow. It came from a dish cooked to the exact degree it needed to be. When I stepped out of the restaurant, the night breeze touched my cheeks, cool and clear. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel the need to return to the past just to explain myself to someone. I just wanted to keep living for me. And if someone had the patience to stay, maybe I'd let them. Charleston, late May. Do you think food and art are the same? Rowan asked, drying a chef's knife with a linen towel. I was perched on the wooden counter in the birch table's kitchen, legs swinging gently, a glass of mint lemonade in my hand, freshly squeezed by Rowan himself, for his temporary assistant/unpaid judge. It was Monday, the restaurant's day off, but he'd come in to test recipes. And somehow, I'd started treating this place like a second studio. I think they share one thing, I said, glancing at the line of spice jars on the shelf. What's that? Both require the creator to feel on behalf of someone else. Rowan nodded slowly. And sometimes, to hurt on their behalf too. I didn't respond. He didn't add anything. With us, silence was never awkward. It was like the white space in a painting, or the breath between two musical notes, necessary and respected. Ever since that first dinner at the restaurant, I found myself coming by more often. At first, just to drop off pastries from the cafe. Then, to help out in the kitchen for a few hours. And eventually, we were actually working together. Rowan said I had an eye for menus. I figured he was just trying to drag me into his chaos. But the truth was, I liked working with him. We brainstormed a weekend mystery menu, where guests wouldn't know what they'd be served. Only poetic descriptions like the first memory of summer or a quiet goodbye that never knocked. I illustrated each course like pages from a children's book. Simple, soft, honest. Strangely, people loved it. They didn't just come to eat. They came to feel. Have you noticed, Rowan said one night after we'd closed early, that my dishes only started getting real attention after they came with your drawings? I laughed, pouring tea for both of us. I figured it's because you finally eased up on the salt. He laughed, too. A real one this time. But it wasn't just about food or art anymore. There were nights we'd walk together after work, grab sandwiches from a late-night food truck, sit by the dock, and watch cruise ships drift slowly by. Talking about things no one ever feels the need to explain. I told Rowan about my father, the only one in my family who ever saw me as more than somebody's daughter. How he taught me to draw before I could even spell my name. How I held his hand in the hospital the last time, without knowing it was the last time. Rowan didn't say anything. He simply rested his hand on my wrist, gentle, steady, and asked, So, do you still paint for yourself? I was quiet for a long time. Not yet, but I'm trying. He nodded. All right, then I'll keep cooking until you do. I didn't answer, just looked at him, really looked. Long enough to realize that some people don't promise to stay. They just give you enough reasons to stop being afraid of being left. A week later, I moved a few things into the apartment above the birch table. Temporary, Rowan said, because my old place was under renovation. But we both knew no one had asked me to come, and I didn't need an invitation. It was the first time in my life I had walked into a place, Not because someone opened the door for me, but because I chose to step through it. Charleston. Mid-June. I found Rowan on the rooftop of the restaurant, the place he went whenever he needed, as he put it, space to breathe a decision. He was sitting on an old iron chair, sleeves rolled up, a stack of documents resting in his hands. "There's a culinary investment fund in Asheville," he said. "They visited the Birch table last week. No introductions, no business cards. Just sat, ate, and watched." "So, like mystery diners?" I asked, surprised. "Sort of, but not Michelin-type critics. They invest in spaces that, in their words, have soul." He paused. "They want to fund 2 new locations, one in Asheville, one in Savannah. Full creative control, operational support, but—" Rowan trailed off. I looked at him. "But what?" "They want a dual concept model, food and art, and they'll only move forward if you come on board, officially, as co-founder." I froze. "Rowan, I just paint wooden boards and help with menu ideas. I don't have a business degree. I've never run anything." "You have what no degree can teach," he cut in. "You make people remember they're not just eating, they're feeling something. And you turn food into something people want to talk about." I lowered my head, my hand tightening over my thigh. "I've never put my name on anything that mattered," I whispered. "Everything I tried to build before, it was taken away because I wasn't worthy enough, at least not in their eyes." Rowan leaned over, resting a hand on my shoulder, light but steady. "Then maybe this is the moment you sign something. Not to prove you're enough, but because you've always been. They just didn't see it." We sat in silence. Below us, the city moved like a jazz track with no lyrics. I didn't promise. But I took the documents, pressed them to my chest, and said, "Give me a few days, but if I say yes, I'm designing the logo myself." Rowan smiled. That slow, crinkling smile, like he'd just watched the sunrise from the inside out. Deal already made. The next morning, I started sketching. A simple logo, a wooden table, 2 chairs set at a slight diagonal. One side held a plate of food, the other, an open sketch pad, handwritten underneath, "Table and Soul." Charleston. 3 days before the signing, I stood in front of the mirror, holding the linen shirt Rowan said I should wear for the investor meeting. "Looks just free enough, but still says co-founder with vision," he'd told me, and I believed him. The back door opened. Lisette, the former owner of the Wayfarer Cafe, the woman who gave me my first job after Port Haven, walked in holding a thin white envelope. "Someone left this for you," she said, her face a little tense. "Said to deliver it by hand. It's from a law office, Raleigh and Finn. Port Haven." My breath caught. Every syllable of Port Haven hit like a silent detonation, shattering the rhythm I'd worked so hard to keep steady. I took the envelope. My hands were cold. In the quiet of the back room, I opened it, like lifting the lid on a memory I thought I'd drowned at the bottom of the ocean. Inside, a formal notice summoning members of the Dune family regarding revisions to the inheritance structure of Dune and Company per the amended will of Elara's grandfather. The last line, bolded, "Required presence, Elara Marianne Dune, current residence unknown." I sank into the nearest chair, feeling like someone had yanked a single thread loose. And every stitch I'd spent years repairing just tore open at the weakest seam. 3 years. 3 years living as El Not because I needed to hide, but because I needed to live a life that wasn't measured by business cards, polished lies, or backroom handshakes. And now, that name had returned, just as I was preparing to write a new one onto the contract of my future. That night, Rowan found me sitting in the kitchen, golden light casting long shadows across the tiled floor. The letter was laid out in front of me. I didn't bother to hide it. He read it slowly. Didn't ask anything. "What do you want to do?" he asked, finally. I swallowed hard. "I don't know. Part of me wants to burn it. Part of me wants to go back and look them all in the eyes and ask, why did you think I'd never dare to lift my head again?" "And if you do that," he said gently, "what happens to Table and Soul?" I looked at him, not like a lover, but like a teammate. I don't want the past to bleed into the present, but I also don't want to build something beautiful on top of a name I'm still hiding from. Rowan nodded, eyes softening. "Then, if you have to go back, I'll go with you." I blinked. "Rowan, you don't—" "Not letting you fight this alone," he cut in. "Not this time." I didn't answer right away, but later that night, I pulled out the very first sketchbook I'd used in Charleston. On the last page, I wrote one line. "They can take your name off a birth certificate, but no one gets to take you away from yourself. Charleston." Early morning, 2 days after the letter from Port Haven. The knock came at 7:08 a.m. Unusual. Too early for a delivery. Too late to be mistaken for wind tapping at the glass. It came again. 3 knocks. Firm, unhurried. Certain. I opened the door, and there she was. Celeste Dune, my mother. She stood on the porch wearing a gray trench coat, hair pulled tightly back, gripping a worn leather bag like someone just returned from battle. I didn't speak. Neither did she. A moment stretched. 3 years collapsed into the blink of an eye. "You look different," she said at last. Her voice was even, as always, but for the first time, I heard the fatigue behind it. "It's not that you didn't know the address," I said. "You just never wanted to use it." She nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a blow she knew was coming. "Will you let me in?" I stepped back, half a step. Not much, but enough. We sat in my kitchen, small, sunlit, not like the cold, cavernous kitchen back in Port Haven, where every word was a negotiation and every silence had a price. Here, no one was listening, and there was nothing left to pretend. "Things at Dune and Company aren't good," my mother began. "A few bad investments since Aria's restructuring. Sponsors have pulled out. Our main partners are suing. Without your shares, we can't retain controlling interest." "We?" I raised an eyebrow. "You know, no one has used that word with me in 3 years." She was quiet, and in the eyes that had once been ice, I saw the first cracks. "I'm not here to justify anything," she said. "I'm here because Aria's no longer in Port Haven." "She left." I froze. "What about Benji?" I asked, my tone sharp. "Divorced. Less than a year after the wedding. Neither of them will take responsibility. But I will. Because I pushed everything so far that no one had a way back." I set my cup down. "And now you need me to save the very thing you once told me I was too naive to understand? That's why you came?" She didn't answer right away. But this time, for the first time, she didn't look at me like I was a fragile mistake. She looked at me like I was someone who might still hold what she had lost. "I'm asking you," she said, her voice hoarse. "If there's anything left of the name Dune that still matters to you, it needs you now." I didn't answer. Not because I was torn, but because I was thinking. Not with my heart, but with a trust that had once been shattered and rebuilt piece by piece by my own hands. "You don't have to decide now," she said, standing. "But Port Haven has no one left to call your name." She left a different envelope on the table. Not a summons this time, but a photograph. Me at 10 years old, standing beside my father, paint-smeared hands, grinning in front of a mural we'd made together. Scrawled underneath, in his uneven handwriting, If you choose to create something of your own, don't fear it being broken, because you can rebuild it with will. I sat for a long time after she left, not out of guilt, but because, for the first time, I knew I had the right to choose, not the responsibility to carry. Port Haven, 2 weeks later. I returned to Port Haven on a late afternoon in early July, when the lavender lining the roadside had gone dry, and the wind carried the scent of burnt grass. The town hadn't changed, but I had. I was no longer the Elara from 3 years ago. The timid girl tucked behind a window frame at her own engagement party, clutching a bouquet no one had given her. This time, I came back with my hair tied high, a folder of documents in my hand, and canvas shoes painted by my own hand. Floral swirls I'd designed in the sunlit kitchen of the birch table, where my colors had come alive again. The boardroom at Dune and Company was unusually quiet. My mother sat at the head of the table, thinner now, her eyes no longer sharp but softened, as if learning how to let go. I pulled out a chair, opened the folder. Merger proposals, restructuring plans, and before all else, a dignified withdrawal agreement. "You once said I wasn't practical," I began, voice steady. "But you were wrong about one thing. Being practical isn't about sacrificing what you believe in. It's about knowing what to hold on to, and what to finally let go." She nodded. No defense, no negotiation. She had understood, or perhaps finally chosen to believe, that I was capable of carrying the legacy she once thought only Arya could bear. I didn't stay long. That evening, I visited the small cemetery at the edge of town, where my father lay buried. I left a new drawing beside his grave, a hand, open, not grasping, not holding, just inviting the light in. "I've chosen my own path, Dad," I whispered. "And this time, no one's taking it from me." A few days later, I was back in Charleston. Rowan met me at the station. No tight hugs, no pressing questions. He simply took my hand and said, "I added another chair to the board." "For who?" I asked, smiling. "For the woman who taught me that food doesn't need explanation, and neither does life." 3 months later, Table and Soul opened its first branch in Asheville. I stood beside Rowan beneath the soft golden lights on a warm evening filled with acoustic guitar and quiet laughter. Guests entered, menus in hand. On one side, the name of the dish. On the other, an illustration meant to stir something within. I no longer used a pseudonym. In the bottom right corner of every page, illustration, Elara Dune. No bold print, no underlines. Just clear enough, like me. When a young woman came up to ask if I'd be willing to share the journey I'd been on, I didn't speak of betrayal or heartbreak. I simply said, sometimes the doors we think we're being pushed out of are actually the ones guiding us toward the right one. And this time, it's us who open it. She smiled and nodded, and I turned back to the easel, where one corner of the canvas still waited for its final stroke. Not to finish, but to continue.